Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Janice Callahan, and I had her on over a year ago, and I'll put that in the description, a link to it. So if you want to hear her full, uninterrupted story, but today we're going to chit chat.
Yay! It's good
So
to
if you
see
don't
you,
want to hear,
Peggy.
huh?
It's good to see you.
You too. So if you don't want to hear me chit chatting, then you can just click off. So there's nothing like when two into ears get together. I mean, the energy and the excitement. And so I'm going to let you start wherever you like, and we'll just see where this goes.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So for anyone who hasn't seen my actual NDE testimony, it happened it'll be 5 years, October the 5th of this year. And really, I love to share my testimony for a lot of different reasons.
Wait a minute. What
Number
did you
one,
say? Did you say
what?
October 5th this year?
Yeah,
So
it'll be 5 years.
okay, be 5 years. Okay, I didn't hear that part. It's like it'd be October 5th this year. Like, what? Okay.
And so, with that being said, I feel like in this past 5 years, I have been through such a process of reintegrating back into regular everyday life. And so this morning I was contemplating exactly what I felt led to share about and to chat about. And honestly, Peggy, the one thing that's coming to mind, if you haven't seen my testimony, I would encourage you to check that out. But the one thing that's coming to mind this morning is the power of God and how real the heavenly realm is. Peggy, we believe a lot of things about ourselves. When I was in the throes of death, literally dying, there was this experience in dying itself. And what I mean by that is everything that made me who I am or what I believed about myself was like ripped away. So the titles, mother, sister, daughter, friend, addict, lesbian, depression, anxiety, all of those things began to pull away from me. And in the presence of the Father, in the presence of God, it was so profound to me as I was thinking this morning how I was just what I truly am in him, in his presence. And that is a fragile, weak being that was dependent on him for everything in that moment.
He sparks a thought there I've had before about NDEs and the bright white light. And I don't know if I can't remember if he was in the bright white light part. Okay. But it seems like, or you're in the presence of God, is that for me, that bright white light now kind of resembles I don't want to say naked, but you're like spiritually naked in front of God. So when you say those things are all stripped away, those roles
Yes.
and those identities you had, it's just you. It's just like the you were when you were little, before you had
Yes.
all this trauma, before you had all these roles, before all this stuff happened. It's like you remember who you were originally.
Yes. And that vulnerability and that sensation and that awareness of being fully known, like totally known and totally loved, unlike anything here on earth. And as I stood before the Spirit of God, his presence, the power that was just permeating, it was all love, and how I was invested in the ideas that I had about myself without truly understanding the power of God. Does that make sense? Yeah. So just the heavenly dimension and what he truly is and how capable he is to bring things out of us that are not true, are not really who we are.
And
You
it's such
know,
a parent role.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's like a
Absolutely.
child, only seeing themselves from their perspective and not understanding where their parent is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree with that. And the thing that's coming to mind as you say this is like the selfish ambitions that we have here just faded away. Like the selfish ambitions I had for my own life totally faded away. Um, and the only thing that mattered, it was love, and how I was loving others, how he loved me, and how, quite frankly, how ridiculous a lot of the things that we do are. Like we're looking for the very thing that we're running from.
We see how lame we can be.
That's a really good way to put it. I agree. Um, one of the things that I was super into, um, and along with my addiction, it was also, I was into a lot of like polyamory and like sadistic type fetishes and things like that. And it was like those things were flashing before my eyes in his presence, and I knew that he knew, and he loved me so much anyway. And it was like I don't know how to explain it, but it was like I was so covered. I was so, it's almost too much for words to even try to put it into words. You know, there was a point in my experience where I was pulled into his spirit. And so my experience, I'll just kind of give a recap then. So I am dying a drug related death. I am praying, terrified. It is terrifying to go through this experience. I'm in my mind, I'm screaming out to God. At this point, I'm asphyxiating, so I can't even breathe, but I'm screaming out to him in my mind, begging not to die. And then boom, in his presence. And the near death experience part is in the other video if they want all the details. Because it actually, I don't know that I could ever even tell the whole experience in its entirety, because as time goes by, I remember more and more and more of it. So I'm in his presence, and it's like this point in the experience where he pulls me into his spirit, and I see that he literally holds me together. He's responsible for holding me together. And not only am I within him, but there were others within him as well. And the object of his desire was us. And there wasn't anybody that he was loving more or loving less. Everyone was equal to him. As a child, I did experience a lot of trauma, and I believe that greatly impacted my life. But in his presence, I was no longer a victim of those things that happened. Those pains and those wounds were all healed, and to such a degree that when I came back, it was almost like being a blank slate. And I don't know if that was what you remember. I know your story involved a lot of childhood
I
trauma
don't
as
know
well.
why you saying that almost brought me to tears, because I have heard so many times on my show the child abuse that people had, and they've had an NDE. And it just seems this reoccurring theme. And it makes me feel like God adopts us when he
Yes.
sees we don't have that parental protection. It's like we're sent an extra angel or something, protection, or that when we have our NDE, that we don't stay over there. We're given a second chance. And we have it now through being loved by that Heavenly Father,
Yeah.
instead of living life mad because we didn't get what everybody else got, that
Right.
protection and that love. And now we carry that love with us, and it gives us a skip in our step.
It does. It does. I think that when I came back, it was like I understood that as painful as those experiences were, there was still a person who may have been responsible for those experiences who was also hurt and hurting,
Mm-hmm.
and quite frankly ignorant of how their actions would affect another person. That's been such a paramount change also in the way that I parent, quite frankly, and how I parent by his leading now instead of my own selfish ambition for what my children are supposed to look like and act like and be like. And it's given me such a liberty and a freedom in that area of my life.
Parenting with wisdom.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Another point that I was really had to be almost reprogrammed from the world, because in the world's version of love, people assume that if someone is overly nice or overly sweet, that they're very loving. And there's been multiple seasons where I'm being shown how love means telling the truth. And sometimes those truths are difficult topics, it's not sweeping everything under the rug. It's actually setting boundaries and respecting and honoring the other person enough to say, this is actually not true. You're believing this about yourself, but it's not true. It tells the truth. It sets us free, but it's not tolerating abuse at any time. And that, to me, I thought that if I really loved someone, I should tolerate abuse before this experience. And it's a hallmark in my life. We talked about the childhood stuff. It's a hallmark. And it was like I kept going through this cycle my entire life of attracting and connecting with abusive people, and then proving my love to them by tolerating the abuse instead of turning to God and asking for him to help us. You know what I'm saying? Or even
I
to
do.
help them.
Yeah. Yeah. How I see that now at my age is I can look back and see where I had unconditional love for my family because, nothing I did was good enough. So I kept trying to be good, make them love me. And I did that throughout, my first marriage.
Right.
And now I can look back and see how I did that with my adopted children when they should have had the hammer brought down, so to speak, consequences. I had the unconditional love and I just let them keep walking on me like I always did with people. And then, our youngest adopted, I was just looking back recently and they'd say, well, where did you go wrong? I was like, he was such a good kid. He never gave me any trouble. He was youngest of the adopted and the boy after 10 girls, the other boys are oldest. And why was he? And I was like, I spoiled him. And I can look back now and like, there I went again, that unconditional love that isn't always a good thing. Once he turned 18 and he started presenting behaviors, because he never did before, I kept doing the unconditional love. He would slam that door right in my face at his house and the house would shake. Well, guess what? I would be back a week later, knock on his door. I could have got killed.
Wow.
And, women end up in domestic violence situations like that. They end up in graves like that. We learn as kids, somebody knocks you out cold, will you still love them? Someone beats you up, will you still love them? Right? Because we learn that as kids. I still love mom. I still love my stepdad. I still love you love your step. They did these things awful. Will you still love them? I was never that person that says, I hate you because you did that to me, and people would say, oh, you need to forgive. I'm like, what are you talking about? I never stopped loving them.
Those traumas that you're talking about, I'm thinking of how they stay with us, even though we may have in our own way continue to love them or, forgiven them. It stays within us, and without releasing all of that, it stays within us. But also I'm hearing how so the intensity that we experienced in childhood was maybe something that we looked for as we got older, or tolerated. Maybe we didn't look for it, but it was in our lives, and then we tolerated. But like balance is so lacking because, you know, too much of a doormat and then absolutely no patience, right? Like in different areas. These are just some of the things that, you know, I sit and ponder now, and, you know, learning how to have, quite frankly, a kingdom mindset, and not tolerating, and knowing that I do matter. I am a sacred vessel here on a mission, you know, as are you, as are the other people who are watching this. You know, everyone has a purpose. And I feel like a lot of that stuff that we went through, it was like a lack of identity and not knowing our purpose and how to walk in it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how, it's the other people out there like that, I guess, that just never learned to say, I'm sorry, you can't treat me like this. Like that wasn't in my vocabulary. And I think it's a lot of people that I see that are just so nice that other people see a victim. You said,
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I've shared with you, I work with women who were exploited and trafficked. And it is so prevalent in their personalities that the childhood experiences, absent fathers, and then coming into these situations, and a lot of them not having the opportunity to fully be formed as an individual before they were taken into these situations. And so, like, that inability to have the balance was never established, and the tolerance of the abuse, and the coercion and all of it, and how it gets so deep and so dark. You know, there's nothing that I see that's different in their situations and mine, except I didn't run into those people who were. Does that make sense?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's so terrible. And I'm in Dallas, Texas, which is the third in the world for trafficking industry.
Wow.
Houston's number one. So Texas is
Wow.
having a major issue with this. Yeah.
What are they doing about it?
Well, are you talking about like politically?
Okay. Okay. I guess I'm just throw off topic here from that question. And
Okay.
I've been reading in the news that 60 to 90% of child sex trafficking comes from our foster care system in the United States. And so it seems to me like that would be a great place to start, would be the foster care system, because what happens is, having 60 foster kids myself, my kids didn't like just run away and nobody hear from them again. If there was a problem with running away, then we find a home where they're going to be satisfied and safe, and then they can run away from there. But it's so many people are just letting these kids run away and not report it, and they're
Okay.
out on the
So,
streets, and that's where prostitution starts. And then,
right.
but it's not just the being the victims of the child sex trafficking. It's also the traffickers are coming out of this foster care system. And so I think it touches home with what we're talking about. I think
Right.
sometimes people are victims so long, and they come across someone that's weaker. Oh, I get to be the abuser now. I'm in control. I get to be on the other side of the coin. And that starts to become their personality. They feel stronger and empowered. And I can see the psychology in it, and the kids that are gravitating towards these the prostitution.
Within the first 24 to 48 hours, usually the person is taken. So if the runaway is on the street, typically a person who is predatory in that way and is operating in that manner is going to connect with that child within the first 24 to 48 hours. They're then groomed. They're promised all kinds of wonderful things. And just depending on how this particular trafficker might work, it could start out as a love story. It could start out as an abusive kidnapping. There's and everything in between.
But
Predator nature, like it,
because the
these
kids
people,
out there, they got to eat, they got to sleep.
right,
And so how are they going to get these things? And what are they going to have to do?
right,
Because they can't go to the system
yeah.
because they don't want back in that system. They want their independence. And this is the way, money is the way to get it. And, I knew as a kid contemplating runaway that if I did that, I wouldn't graduate high school. And so I put up with, I may die before I'm 18 from child abuse, but I've got to get that diploma because you run away, you can't go enroll yourself in school. It's done. You're not going to graduate. If you don't graduate, where are you going to work?
Right.
You can't go to college.
I left home at 15. My story was I left home at 15, moved in with my boyfriend at the time. I stayed in school, but it was the drug use was so intense that I didn't make it to school a lot of days. And so I did a lot of Saturday school, but
so your parents weren't coming to get you.
No.
Okay. That's what I'm saying. There's kids that, take off and leave and the parents don't come get them.
Yeah. And by then, at 15, I was employed. I was a decent student. I wouldn't say I was a honor roll or anything. Got along well with my teachers. I wasn't a disruption. My teachers knew I wasn't living at home. My friends knew I wasn't living at home. I stayed, out of the eye of the law. So I wasn't made to go back home. That's why I'm saying there's no difference in what happens to the people that are in trafficking and me, except I did not fall into the hands of a predator.
Did you get on drugs after you moved out?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it escalated. Like I was already experimenting when I lived at home, and it escalated because I had no supervision. And that was a very experimental period from 15 to 19, trying all the different things, having all of the different, 15 to 19 was just a blur, quite frankly, but at 19 is when the first time I ever tried my drug of choice. After I tried that particular drug, I didn't care about any others. It was that one or nothing.
Did you graduate?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Don't ask me how.
Back then. Yeah.
But it was really important to me to graduate, and
Yeah.
at the time I really wanted to go to law school. I wanted to, be an attorney. I wanted to be a voice for justice for people that were oppressed. That was a dream of mine. And I worked in a law office when I graduated high school. Ended up not going that route. I remember days where I was so strung out at that law office, and they loved me. They were so good to me. They didn't know what was going on. They probably had suspicions, but they were amazing to me. And it became like a family. So what happened for me, my story was I began to throw myself into work, and career became the most important thing to me. So, I was the one that was willing to stay late, come in early. Yes, I was partying. Yes, I was getting high, but I was getting some work done too. And, it just became a lifestyle of not
that's lifestyle. A lot of attorneys too, right?
I don't know. I'll tell you this. I worked in my addiction. I worked up until my death experience. I was never employed. There's a lot of people in professional world in the professional world that struggle with addiction.
Yeah.
Teachers, nurses, doctors, business people. I think we think of like that person on Skid Row who's all strung out.
Mm-hmm.
And that just is not true. It is not an accurate stereotype in any way. You know, a lot of the people that we see on the streets today have actually been misplaced by COVID and divorce and things like that. Not that there aren't also some people who are on the street because of addiction, but I'll tell you, it's the difference between homelessness and not being homeless for a lot of people is a couple of paychecks, you know.
I'll
So
tell you the truth. When I worked at Children's Services, once a year they had a directors conference. And I wanted to go and learn. You know, I was always signing myself for all the trainings I could get anyway. So I get a director's conference. That's not what it was about. I mean, the trainings were there, but it was everybody's chance to have an affair.
oh wow.
Yeah, I found that out real quick. And I, of course, was not going to go along and do that. And I was like, you know, what happens here stays here. And if I wasn't doing all these things too, then we don't trust you. We don't want to hang out with you and that kind of thing, whatever. And then when I was in academy to work at a women's prison, I went through the academy and I started working at the prison. But well, at the academy, there was sexual stuff, which was not allowed in the hot tub in public at a West Virginia University, which was side of the academy, and I reported it because that's just who I am. I'm a narc. I'll tell you, I'm a narc. I'm just like law enforcement to my core, and
Okay.
because the reason was there's a big swimming pool. It's like a YMCA, and there's a hot tub in this room, and these two candidates to work at a juvenile prison, women candidates, right? Just got hired in. These are all new hires through the academy, are doing sexual things to the men there for the academy at different levels and positions in the hot tub. Okay. At a certain time, and they knew what time to get out because at a certain time, the elderly people that this like YMCA type deal are doing their laps and their aerobics in the water aerobics. Now it's time for them to go to the hot tub. And they are doing this stuff in the daggone water. And these elderly people are now getting in that water. And that was just wrong. I wasn't going to put up with it. I mean, I was like, that is just wrong. I mean, old people getting in that, right? Am I like painting a picture here, right? And they were lined up for this hot tub doing this and knowing those old people are going to come get in this water. And so, of course, I report it. Well, I get death threats shoved underneath my room. My door said, snitches get stitches. And it was out of cut out magazine words, like you see in a movie, like really going to scare me. So I reported that. They had to have a bodyguard on me before graduation. A bodyguard to watch me because these people were threatening. And the corporal called me in. He says, Peggy, I called everybody in here and questioned about all these different things I reported. He said, you were the only one that told me the truth out of all of these.
Yeah, I don't even know why I'm laughing about that. Like, this is serious. This is what I'm talking about. These are the kind of things that people do, not understanding the ramifications of their actions, you know? And I am the worst at this. Like, yes, sanctification is a progressive journey and character development matters so much to the Father. Prior to this incident, I would have been in the hot tub. Prior to this incident, I was so influenced by the world, Peggy. And I'm grateful that when I came back, it was like a blank slate because I didn't have those spirits dwelling in me anymore. You know, I was obsessed with those types of behaviors and activities. Sex was such an addiction. Love was such an addiction for me, you know, and that's what I hear, you know, is people who are needing that affirmation. They need to be validated by sexual behaviors, you know, and attention. That's how I was, you know, and it was not unusual. You know, I was actually talking to someone the other day about how it's so prevalent when I lived that way. I never had a shortage of people to spend time with, you know, and since my experience living a completely different lifestyle, I do have a few very close friends and they're precious to me, but there's been such a shift in my social life for sure, because the things that were appealing to me back then, again, that was all like pulled away, ripped out, burned out. Really, I can't even articulate it, when I had that experience.
I appreciate your honesty that you would have been one of those girls. And,
Yeah.
I think what it's touching on is that, another example I'll give. So later on, I'm still working at the prison and we go to a conference. It's like all week long. We have to stay in these rooms and go to these classes. And it's all about, addictions, learning how to treat these offenders' addiction. Guess what everybody was doing as soon as they got out of class? Getting completely drunk.
Wow.
From the high up level all the way down. And one of them, the high up level, we thought was going to call squad for, like alcohol poisoning. I mean, wouldn't that been pretty for a warden to be so drunk that they end up in the hospital almost, overdosing on alcohol at a training for offender addiction.
So you're kind of a rule follower, it sounds like you appreciate order, you appreciate righteousness,
Yeah,
and
because I know how those things hurt people.
okay.
I know how, like the old people, they're going to be hurt by this. The
Mm-hmm.
stuff in the water is just like, I can't accept this. Everybody else is laughing. And I'm like, I can't accept this. Those poor old people, if they knew what was in that water, it's just like so upsetting to me. And like, I was the kid in high school when everybody's standing around laughing, cheering when somebody's getting beat up. And I'm the one, this is not funny. This is not right. I'm going to go tell. Because I mean, yeah, I was a bad girl for a while, but when it comes to somebody getting hurt, I was like, no way, no how. I'm not standing here and going along with this. You don't hurt people, because I was always the one getting hurt. So I was always identifying with the person that was getting hurt. I identified with if I was an old lady and climbing in that crap. And, I would want somebody to speak up. And so that's just it's just like ingrained in me. And like,
Yeah,
even
that's called being a peacekeeper, but that's called being a peacemaker. Excuse me,
yeah,
Peggy.
but a lot of
Being
people
a
see that as a
peacemaker.
narc, like I'm the person, I'm just causing the problems. I'm just, and I'll be that if I have to be. I don't want to be like, I start out in the cool crowd and then something comes up, some ethical issue, and all of a sudden like, crap, we were back up. We thought you were cool. I'm like, well, I'm a different kind of cool because that ain't cool. So yeah, I am. It's just I don't know. It's like my first NDE when I was 5, when I drowned, this strong sense of injustice grew in
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah.
Because, I was shown my family didn't love me. And I'm like, what? Like, I didn't know that at 5 years old. You get this knowledge from the heavens, you really don't love you. I'm like, what? Well, I didn't know that. And then I thought at least my mom loved me. And then I heard a voice so clear said, children are sent here to be loved. That is why God sends them here. And I'm like, wait a minute. Because I'm like 5 years old. I still have this sassy little attitude. I'm like, wait a minute. You just let me know my family don't love me. And then you say that's why we're sitting here. Well, that ain't right. That ain't fair. And that sense of injustice never
Okay.
comes to me.
Wow. So it was a gift put in you that, yeah, it keeps.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love it. I love it.
And I got, mistreated a lot because I would stand up to my family. They did something to my disabled sister. Well, that's not right. Everybody else like, who cares, And then something else would happen. I was like, well, that's not right. And one day I was only in the 5th grade and I called the police because my mom was beating up her boyfriend's wife out in the front yard. And my sister's older. She's sitting there laughing. I ran in and called the police because it all seems supposed to be beating up each other.
Wow. It's interesting you make that point though, because that was kind of, you had that sense of injustice and that peacemaker gift put in you. And then in my experience, when I said, what do I do? And he said, love them. And that is something that runs through my veins. I mean, and that is how he guides me and leads me, and how I do, I work in a safe house for women, and the way that he has me to interact with them and minister to them is from love, and how that's the lens at which to look at everything, that they are a precious child of God, and that it is love and the goodness of God that brings people into his presence. I think that's really interesting. That's really cool that, I don't know what would have happened to me I guess if I hadn't obviously had my experience, if I had have never had that experience, I don't believe I would have ever gotten free from the bondage that I was in, Peggy, to be honest with you. I had tried so many times to change myself, get clean, be celibate, and just be what, like, I had this desire within me to be a certain kind of person that could just never do it. All of that other stuff seemed to take precedence. I'd have like a couple of months of going to church and stuff, and then a couple of months or a year of partying. And it was just one extreme to the other, like we said earlier. But, it was totally him who gave me the ability to overcome those things. And walking in your gifting with you being that voice of justice is your purpose. And that keeps you fulfilled and keeps you moving forward, right?
Yeah. I used to work at a drug clinic as a primary counselor, like methadone clinic. And it was against everything that I did as child welfare. We weren't allowed to report anything. We could see like abused children or domestic violence out in the parking lot, or, or a woman could tell us something about she's being abused and they're, by her boyfriend, he's taking her drugs or whatever. And we're not allowed to report anything. It's just like, we want to keep the money keep coming in. We don't want to we don't want the police showing up here, or we don't want any reports going out. They don't want to lose those customers. This is money coming in. And of course, goes against everything I'm about. And then one of the counselors was getting ready to adopt one of the client's babies. She was going to have a baby. And when it was born, it was already set up. This counselor was going to adopt it. I'm like, oh, you are not. I said, if you want to adopt, here's the name to the adoption, caseworker in this county, and you go through, you become licensed and stuff, and you don't take a client's baby. This is wrong. This is illegal. This is like abuse of authority. You can't be a counselor and adopt someone's child and counsel them into giving up that child to you for adoption. Wow. This was her client, and I was just like throwing a big old hizzy. And the client is the one that come to me and told me. That's how I got involved, because she wasn't my client. She was this other one's client that was going to take her baby. And I'm like, are you going to do what? No. And she's, well, yeah, she said this. And I'm like, no. And the director knew about it. So I went over the director's head and reported to her boss what was going on. Of course, shit goes downhill, right? So come back on me. But, how you going to come back on me on this? So like, I was constantly like finding these ethical issues. Like this one guy I'm counseling, and he's a truck driver, and he takes his 3-year-old with him on his truck driving routes because it'll keep him awake because he uses so much drugs. I'm like, we got to report this. Oh, no, we're not. Like, this child could die. And so I tell this man, do you realize your child could die? You have an accident. Say he's not even church or hurt, he's going to be taken away. If you cause an accident and say he's not even hurt, thank God, right? Because he could be hurt. But now you have this charge on you and you've caused this accident, and then like you're going to go to prison. And he complained on me for being judgmental. And my boss
what
is
happened
like,
with the baby? What happened with the baby?
Not allowed to report it. Not allowed to report it.
With the other baby, the one that was going to be adopted, did that child?
I quit.
Oh, you quit?
I quit. They tried saying Like I shouldn't have talked to her because she wasn't my client, or my boss tried acting like she didn't know nothing about it, and she did because she didn't want to get in trouble with her boss. You know, it rolls downhill. I'm like, take your $11 an hour and stick it. Right. This girl, she had a master's degree, and some of them, others, I didn't have a master's degree, but some, they're making $11 an hour. Really? Like, stick it.
Wow. Yeah,
And
the systems are always put in place with, well, not always. Systems are put in place with the good intentions, but then there's such an imbalance of things, how sometimes they're carried out, sometimes they're not, and yeah.
yeah, I quit most of my jobs due to ethical reasons. I would try changing things. I would try bringing things out in the open. I would try and make things better. And ultimately, I quit every job I had. And I would say they were probably, if not all, for ethical reasons.
So you're still walking out your life's purpose, even though it looks in the natural like you're quitting jobs. You're actually doing what you were put here to do. Is
I never had trouble getting another job because I always had such good evaluations. And, I had never had any write-ups and, those kinds of things. I never missed work. I was always, a perfect employee. It's just when I saw injustice, I quit. And I started telling people in interviews, if I catch you guys breaking the law, I'm
just know up front if you hire me.
Yeah, I'll be a problem. So if you guys got stuff going on you don't want found out, don't hire me.
Oh, that's right.
Honestly, because it's going to go down.
Wow.
I just when I got blunt about it, you're going to waste my time and you're going to waste your time because it just goes against my grain.
Wow.
So, if somebody's honest, they're going to say, we want this girl on here because we want to know what's really going on. And we want somebody to tell us the truth. But do they want that really? Because I'll tell them first, I'll give them the opportunity to correct it, to make it right.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing, right? But if they don't, then, there's people to report to. I've reported OSHA before.
It would be interesting, Peggy, if you were somehow able to go back and find out what happened to those organizations and those branches of those different systems.
I read about them in the news. I know what happened.
Yeah. Exposure.
It catches up with them.
Yeah, it does.
And this don't shoot stuff that all started with a George Floyd. I told them when I was going to the academy, I seen the problem right there in their testing. They wanted me to put on a test that I would shoot in this situation, in that situation, and that I would shoot. I'm like, first of all, because I'm a counselor at this prison, you're not going to teach me to shoot. So am I going to shoot? No, because all of our tests would go into a file. And if we ever did anything wrong, it would go into court and they would say, here, see here, you took this test. You knew what the right thing to do was and you did the wrong thing. I said, so I had to be very careful what I put on here. And I'm telling you, I would not shoot in this situation and that situation. Now, these two situations over here, yes, I would shoot. But these right here, I said, that is not a reason to shoot.
Okay. Do you ever feel like some of the things that we see though on the media aren't necessarily the whole truth and nothing but the truth? There's that element too, Peggy. Like there's always that. One of the things that I came back when I began to be shown was that what we see and what we're told is not necessarily anywhere near the truth. There's this, it's kind of like a movie. Okay. When there's a movie being played, we're watching it on television. We don't know what it actually looked like on that set and who was involved and who was playing which part and who was financing what. And this may make people mad at me. But I know that there's an element of evil to all of that stuff beyond what we're told and shown. I was in technology sales for 20 years. I was shown things that the average individual doesn't even know exists regarding technology. Interesting things, unbelievable things that exists or being used by different facilities that we don't know anything about. And then I would see it be released on the news. Oh, we've got this new technology. And it would be like a tenth of what is actually in production and in the planning phase and in being manufactured and then being used by, you know what I'm saying? Are you tracking with me here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I quit watching CNN probably 4 years ago, and I stopped watching Fox probably 2 years ago. I just read headlines every day, see what's going on.
Okay.
Because they're trying to sway everybody. They're trying to get everybody turned against each other. The two sides, they want them hating this side, and this side wants them hating that side. And I was like, this is not good for
Yeah, because a house
our mental health.
divided, that they want to keep us all. There is a concerted effort by the powers that be, so to speak, to keep people in division. It's always been this way. I remember, not always been this way. I remember a distinct shift in the media when I was a child and not knowing what I was picking up on. But I remember, a distinct shift, like 80s time frame, and when I began to, after I had my experience and I was, like I like to say, reintegrating, I began to do research on a lot of different things, just things that we take for granted as being true and real. It started with me studying the history of the church and the history of our country and the history of music and media and medicine and all of those different areas that there's seemingly amazing advancements, but then the reality behind every single situation.
And any news thing you read is so slanted.
Sure. Well, there used to be unbiased journaling, reporting, unbiased reporting. That's not the case anymore, but that's when I was young, I remember learning about that in government, but that's not.
You can usually tell by the headline, if not the first paragraph, if it's a liberal or conservative that wrote it.
Yeah. And what's interesting is with the liberal side, which I was such a part of for so many years, Peggy, believing that was the freedom, but being imprisoned by it. And now with my experience and the things that I've learned and perceived in my spirit, being so conservative and absolutely having freedom, having so much inner peace and so much freedom. It's not like oh, poor me, I can't do that anymore. It's the desire is not there, and I am walking in peace. I lay down and I'm asleep before my head hits the pillow kind of peace, but believing the lie. I was very, I wouldn't say very, moderately involved in the LGBTQ movement. And this was back in the 90s, early 2000s. And the way that has shifted, I guess we're just going to hit all the hot topics, but that has shifted so much. There's such a celebrity about it now. Whereas back then it was a cry from people who were being, so murdered and abused, to now it's celebrity and push in our faces. And that's another area that was totally gone. When I came back, that was just not part of me anymore. I don't know. It's amazing.
And as far as the LGBTQ, what I find funny is the stuff I've read is the L don't like the G, and the G don't like the B, and the B don't like the T, and they don't like the Q. It's like, why do you say them as if they're all one thing? Because they're all separate things and they all don't agree with each other.
You're correct. You're correct. I think that that was one of the most profound things, was the renewing of my mind regarding that topic, because I remembered being such a small child and being attracted to little girls. I mean, I was a kid, I was a kindergartner, and this girl's pretty and this boy's cute, and and then that kind of continuing, and then it really getting pressed in from radio talk shows that were on at the time, and it was it became very popular. And so I was like, well, I always kind of wanted to, I'm going to do it anyway. And then to the just living out of the closet, so to speak, living out loud who I was, loving whoever I wanted to, believing that love is love, and that everything I was doing was okay because I wasn't hurting anybody. But the reality is I came back not having those desires at all. And
I've
it
heard that
was,
before from NDOs.
yeah, I didn't plan to change that part of me. That was, I was really bought into those belief systems, that whole programming. And in fact, for me, I was even into suffice to say, like, the different experiences that I had in life led me to those belief systems, but it's pushed at us from every different angle these days, you know. Yeah, I mean, everything. I would say the way that most people present themselves to others is, for a lot of people, what's programmed to be accepted by our society. And it's on an unconscious level. Everything from the brands that we wear to whether or not we use makeup, to whether or not we cut our hair, to whether or not we everything. It's we're programmed from the moment we're born onward. And it was like that programming was wiped clean. And he began to show me and to reveal to me who I really was.
Her eyes are opened after NDE.
Yes, yes.
I think my eyes was opened to my ex-husband. I was so in love with him and dependent on him that I didn't see how his drinking had become alcoholism, had turned into violence, that it could affect our little boys growing up. And I didn't want them, after the NDE, to be that way. And he's one of my ex, he's one of 8 boys in that big Catholic family. And so the uncles, everybody lived around and they're visiting all the time. And I got really, after my NDE, I just, like, my eyes was opened up to, what are my boys seeing? What's in their future? Are they going to treat women like this? Are they going to drink like that? Are they going to be alcoholics too? Is this because it was there from their dad and their uncles and then passed down, and like, are my boys next in line? What have I done? It was like in my face where I didn't notice it before. I was just trying to fit in and go along and accept and just don't divorce me. Don't take my kids. And that's what my fear was. So I was accepting so much because I thought I didn't have a choice. Because I had caught them talking one time, telling my husband to take the kids and divorce me. And I had just got fixed at 20 years old, so he wouldn't divorce me. And I'm hearing them now after I'm fixed. I had walked down the stairs. It was like Christmas, and I was upstairs visiting with his mom and everybody and the women. And I walked down the stairs. I heard the men talking, and I walked real quiet and listened. And I overheard even his dad, who I thought liked me. And I peeked around the corner and I saw his dad not saying anything, but not stopping it either. Like, they was all in agreement, all his brothers and uncles and his dad telling my husband, you need to take the kids and divorce her. And I broke inside. And we just lived like half a mile from there to drive home. I told him it was time to go. And we went and got our babies. I had a newborn and a 1.5-year-old. And I just got fixed. I always wanted 10 kids. I just got fixed for this man because he forced me. I begged him 9 months I was pregnant, don't make me do this, get fixed. And he said he'd divorce me if I didn't. And now, after I did that, I hear his family telling him, divorce me and take the kids. And so on the way home, that short drive home, I went numb. It was like I was falling through a pit, into a dark pit. And we got to our trailer. I put the kids in bed. It's like on robot mode. And I put them in bed. And I went to the bathroom. And I shut the door. And I sat there and I felt myself, like, if you could imagine sinking slowly to hell, sinking slowly into this dark pit. And I was just going. I gave up. I just broke. And I don't know if that's what like a mental breakdown feels like, but I broke and I was sinking. I was like, I think I was going comatose. Like, people that's had so much stress on them that they become comatose. And my ex, his mom was in and out of mental hospitals with shock treatments and everything. And so she was always on a lot of medication. And so my husband grew up seeing this mentally ill mom and in and out of mental hospitals. And when he opened up the door, I think he saw his mom in me and what he went through as a kid with her mental illness. And because I just sat there like frozen and thinking he's going to divorce me and take my kids. I've fixed myself. And I was sinking like into oblivion, into the blackness and gone. And as I'm going, not yet gone, I could see on like my corner of my eye, he would open up the door and look at me. And then I could hear him pacing the hall, but it was kind of like, I wasn't really paying attention, and it started to become more of my attention. And then he opened up the door, he says, please don't do this. And I thought, well, maybe he does care. And I was coming back out of it. But I would say that was probably the lowest point in my entire life. And I really do think that I was going to like be like a vegetable the rest of my life. Like I was going to go catatonic.
Oh, Pegi.
That's where I was
so
headed.
Sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you.
And so the next day, I noticed on my wall in my trailer above my rocking chair, because I rocked my kids and sang to them all the time, I seen a picture I had there. It was wood and a picture of Jesus on the cross, and it said, "Forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they do." And every time I felt that fear again, I would go read that, and I'd forgive them, Father, they don't know what they do.
Right.
And it got me through. But I really do. I think I was going to be I think I was headed towards catatonic, or this broke. And I don't know why I brought that up, but people go through stuff. And then I know the show's like, oh, we want to hear about NDEs. I want to hear everything beautiful. But after that second NDE, I started where I went almost catatonic. Those things started coming to mind, and I started dealing with them. I started revisiting stuff that I just pushed under the rug. I started like, okay, what my husband and his family is doing is wrong. And I don't want my kids to grow up like this. Now, what am I going to do? Well, I went to college, and I started, taking these classes, and I was learning about drug and alcohol abuse and the cycle of abuse and all these things. And I was like healing myself by learning about domestic violence, and because I hadn't started yet, but it started later. And by the later on, I had a career, and so when the domestic violence did start, I was able to file for divorce. And I had, he gave me the kids in the house, and I don't know, it's just like these NDEs change our soul. It's like we come back wiser, and we come back with our head screwed on tighter. Like, we know right from wrong now, whether we do it or not. And I've heard a lot of people just had like really profound spiritual experiences even. Okay, they didn't stop the trans right away, or they didn't stop the alcoholism or drug abuse right away, but it got them thinking and slowly. And then they got to a day, okay, I'm done. I'm following Jesus.
Right.
We all get there when we get there.
We do. It takes what it takes. I mean, that almost sounds like what you experienced was such a deep break in, I don't know. It almost at first started sounding like maybe you were going into shock, like if you'd been in a physical accident. And then he kind of pulled you out when he spoke to you, wow.
And I was only out of the hospital for my second C-section 1 week, and his sister-in-law beat me up in front of several other family members, to the point that I went to the sheriff's department. As soon as I walked in, the cops took one look at me, grabbed their gear, and said, "We're going after him right now. We're going to show him what it's like to pick on a woman." Like they were going to beat the shit out of some man. And I said, it wasn't a man. And they said, "There's no way a woman did this." And I said, "Yeah, it was a woman." And they said, "Well, she must have been really big." I said, "She's my size." I was like 110. And they said, "Well, she must have wore brass knuckles." And so, I mean, they sent me to the hospital, and, I have later on to a neurologist. It affected my vision. I have had double vision ever since. And she pulled out about half of my hair. My hair was real long. She just kept pulling. She bit my face. She growled like a dog. And his family stood there and watched. And one of them, her sister, his youngest sister, says, "My God, you're going to kill her." I went to pull that woman off. And that woman's husband pulled his sister off and said, "No, let him fight it out." I was like, I never touched her. I was walking away. I was like, "I'm going to fight you. I don't fight." Right. And she was always known bragging. Now she was I was always one saying, "Don't fight people." Right. "I'm going to fight you." And I was walking away and she grabbed my long braid and, threw me on the ground and did this. And so she was arrested and everything. And so it was after this that his family thought that he should just divorce me because you don't report family, because his dad had abused their mother for years. He had even knocked a baby out of her, according to the kids, and came home in a shoebox. And, but that's dad, and now here I am, filed charges on family member for beating me up. And you don't do that to family. I'm like, "No, you don't beat family up. That's what you don't do to family." And then, so ironically, later when I filed for divorce and domestic violence, I was working at Children's Services and my boss came over one day and she said, "Peggy, your ex-sister-in-laws are at the prosecutor's office because my ex-mother-in-law had filed domestic and divorce on her husband." And she said, "Because Peggy did it." She didn't know how to get out. She didn't know you could do that.
Oh.
And her daughters come in and said, "Drop these charges. Dad's always done this. Like, it's fine. She's just following Peggy. Like, Peggy's the problem." I'm like, can you imagine your old mother is being beaten, knocked down concrete steps, bruises and cuts all over her. This whole woman's been beaten her whole life. He beat a baby out of her, and your own daughters go and say she don't need to file charges. She don't need to file for divorce.
So tragic. So tragic.
The good Catholic family in the community too. They didn't want it out. They didn't want anybody knowing. Is that love for their mother?
No, and it talks in the word about that men are supposed to love their wife as Christ loved the church, which is a sacrificial, gentle love that is going to move in the wisdom of God and in the spirit of God. He should have the fruit of the Holy Spirit: gentleness, kindness, goodness, love, joy, peace, patience, self-control. Hearing that, it's just like that to me. It talks about how, so many people adopt the religion, but don't grow into the intimacy. They don't experience the joy of the secret place. They're not having those revelations of how we're to treat one another and what love is like. That is like the polar opposite of what God is and what his presence is like. It is literally, and it's so rampant, and it's so complex and disgusting are the words that come to mind. And it took you being beaten, it sounds like, beyond recognition for the mother to believe she could leave also.
Well, it was years after I was beaten that she left. It was years after that I filed on my ex-husband. So, because my son Jeremy was just born, so I was 20 when that sister-in-law beat me up. And then that was in 1981, and it was 1993 when I filed domestic, because his drinking just had become alcoholism and it become violence. And I wasn't putting my kids through that. And I was a foster parent. I worked at Children's Services. And so, but when I didn't know, it was like, I'm guessing maybe a couple years later that his mother had filed on her husband. But she got the idea from me. She didn't know you could do that. She didn't know you could file domestic violence and that you could file for divorce after you file for domestic, because that's what I did. And that's what just what she did. And so I was kind of proud that she, well.
So what did that look like? Did you go into hiding? How did you get away from him?
I filed domestic and divorce, and they issued a restraining order, and he refused to visit our children unless I dropped the restraining order, which he knew how to manipulate me. And so I called the judge, who I knew well because I worked at Children's Services, and I said,
right.
I have to drop the restraining order because he's refusing to visit the kids. Isn't that stupid thing to say? He's refusing to visit the kids if I don't drop it. He says, Peggy, don't do it. Don't do it. And I said, I grew up without a dad and I want my kids to have a dad. And so I dropped the restraining order. And so he behaved himself for the most part. There was a few more times he tried to take my life after I had filed, which he said, you won't report it because second offense is automatic 6 months in jail and you won't get child support and I'll lose my job and you'll never get child support again. So you won't file. It wasn't that I didn't file. It was the fact that he was my husband. He was my father's kids. I didn't want him to go to jail. I wanted him to stop breaking in my house and dragging me up the stairs trying to rape me. I wanted him to stop setting up these schemes to try and kill me. I want him to stop this stuff in front of our children. Because I would never
think, Peggy, about
them.
like the spiritual aspect of all of that it's not flesh and blood that we wrestle against, but powers and principalities. Like, how do you feel like that goes into this story? I don't know. It just sounds to me like a total, I don't know. I mean, oppression, if not possession.
Yeah, it's just like, some of us, and I don't know, I think it's like we need to have some kind of awareness that some people have unconditional love. And if you have that for your spouse that's abusing you, or if you have it for your parent that is abusing you, that somebody needs to explain how this unconditional love, because they say, but I love him, like they can be black and blue in the hospital, right? Or shot in the face. I knew somebody that happened to, but I love him. And we have to have some kind of counseling for people to show how this unconditional love is not helping them and their behavior. It's not helping their soul, because they're going to meet their maker someday. And this unconditional love is just allowing them continue this behavior and never address it. And it's going to get us killed, or it's going to affect our children. And I think people need to just, I don't know, if they could address to people that way, because, as working at Children's Services, I help domestic violence victims all the time. That all of a sudden, one night, I'm getting slammed against the wall. I'm like, I'm now one of those women.
Wow.
And I never seen it leading to that point. But I do now, as I think, oh my gosh, the graveyards are full. I remember this so clear. Graveyards are full of women who thought it would never get this far. And I'm going to be one of them.
Most of the time it happens so gradually. It's like the analogy of boiling a frog. You don't start immediately. A lot of times it just is a gradual turning up the heat. And the other thing is the amount of domestic abuse that never causes any bruises. The coercion, the control.
Right. Because he had never hit me. He'd never hit me until that day. So he'd never hit me. So what was I afraid of?
But make no mistake, Peggy, you were being abused long before he ever hit you.
Right. I was abused when I was pregnant for my second son, and he was saying, you got to get fixed. And I said, well, you're the one that wants it. You get fixed. Nobody touching me down there. Well, I don't want anybody touching me there either, and he's the one that didn't want kids. And I desperately wanted a lot of kids. And so, it started early. I even look back and we're dating. I can see, gosh, why did you, he wanted me to sleep with somebody else, his buddy. where was my self-respect that I would continue dating him? I was like, no way. And I didn't, of course. But where is my self-respect that I didn't break up with him on the spot? Well, I love him. Right.
Yeah, it's that trauma response of wanting to people please, wanting to be accepted, wanting to be loved.
And when you grew up, never loved,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're dating someone and then married to someone that don't love you, well, you've never been loved. The problem is you. You just got to do better. And I keep hearing in the back of my mind the whole time we're talking, someone in the audience left a comment and said, Pegi needs to deal with her problems elsewhere and leave it off of the show. So I'm kind of like, because you know what? Other people have these problems.
They do.
There's women that are putting up with a lot of stuff they shouldn't and don't know why they are. And if, you and I can talk and be honest about, what we went through and how we don't go through it anymore, that you can get to the point where you respect yourself enough to say, no, I love you and I probably always will, but this is not good for me and it's not good for my kids. And
I think when I look back on my relationships, one of my hallmarks for all of the relationships was they started out super intense, like love at first sight stories. It was all about the butterflies. It was all about the intensity and the chemical reaction that would very quickly switch at whatever point, and it would become this verbally abusive, hateful, and I would still be on cloud nine most of the time from the way it started out. So I would be brushing it under the rug. One of the relationships that I was in that ended in such a bad way, I ended up having to move into a home, not disclosing my location because it was a stalking situation. And I was terrified for my life. And he never hit me. He never punched me. He never did those things that you're talking about. But I feared this man, and it created, after living with him for years, it created this very intense, like, a PTSD, where if I saw a truck that was the same color as his, or if he called me, just seeing his name on the caller ID, it was terrifying. And I lived in this state of constant fight or flight for so long. Yeah, it is very real. And when we leave those situations, that period of time, that window, is when the propensity for death increases by, I think, multiple 100%. I can't remember, 300%, 800%. But what I have read in the research that I have done is that it, believe it or not, because I always believed that it was going to be better. I believed every single promise. I sensed that he was sincere and that he did love me and that he did want to be different, but it was like so cyclical. It was like every 30 days he was moving out. Every 30 days the bank account would get emptied. Every 30 days there was a lot of control and manipulation all the time, but it was like big blow-ups, and none of the blow-ups were ever big enough for me to really put my foot down. But I called a hotline one night and I began to tell them about the relationship. And this was a night where he had left. There was a situation. So I was asleep and he came into the room and he threw something on me while I was asleep and began to yell at me. He had been going through old SD card chips. I like photography and I had some old ones, and I'm talking, this picture that he found was 5 years before I'd met him. And it was a platonic friend and I at a concert, and my expression in the picture, he inferred from my expression that I was secretly in love with this individual, and it was just complete chaos. But I had just woken up, so I was confused. But he didn't throw the SD card at me, but he threw the portable hard drive where he had found the SD card, and he threw it at me really hard. And he's yelling at me, and it's dark, and I'm waking up, and I'm confused because I'm in the middle of sleep, And it just escalated to the point, and I was just trying to keep his voice down. Listen, let's just talk about it. Let me explain. Let me explain. Let me try to, somehow make you rational when you're absolutely enraged, which I could never, and then I called. So he ends up leaving, and I'm distraught and have to be to work in a few hours. And I had a newborn child, and I called a hotline. I was like, can you tell me if this is really abuse or if I'm just overreacting? Because I was so convinced that at that point that I was just too sensitive, too emotional, cried too much. And they said, yeah, that's abuse. That's verbal abuse. That's emotional abuse. That is, and through the different scenarios I was telling them, that's financial abuse. That is spiritual abuse, because he was using the Bible against me a lot, which created a lot of confusion in me. I apologize. I'm getting notifications for work for different appointments, but it created such a spirit, like a fear and confusion in me, that I had reached a point in my own mind where the stress was so bad. If you'd asked me how old I was, I couldn't have remembered. If you asked me for my address, I remember one time, going to order something on Amazon, and I couldn't even remember my own home address. That's what living in an elevated state of mind with that fear all the time did to me. That's how it materialized in my life. And I was in technical sales and had to show up every day, rain or shine, with a big smile, ready to do business, right? So I was living this horrible relationship out that I desperately wanted to work, and ultimately when it ended up really, really bad, and it was very scary. And like I said, I went into hiding and had quite an experience, that whole thing that played out in a really interesting way. But what I've read, the research that I've done to go back to that point is, make a plan. You don't have to write it down, because that person's probably going through all of your journals. That person's probably, but make a plan. Begin to formulate a plan in your mind. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to necessarily stay till the next blow up. I think that's what a lot of women do. And then they end up grabbing their purse and their keys and not leaving with a stitch of
While
clothing.
tensions are high.
Yeah. And just make a plan, begin putting together a plan where you can go into a program for yourself and your children, whatever that may look like,
And I always stress when this subject comes up that you're more at risk when you leave
You
than
are.
any other time. So make sure you don't leave during, I'm not saying don't leave during the blow up if you got to get safe, but I mean, if you are able to plan this, then plan like when they're at work or something where they're not coming back, where you have time to exit or file those charges, get the restraining orders so they can't come back, whatever. Do it smart. Do it and stick with it. Because I mean, it's going to be hard. Like I had to take a piece of paper. I mean, because we was married 16 years, we had kids together. So I had to make, why I should leave on one side and why I wanted to stay on the other. And there's only one thing on this one side to stay, and that's because I loved him. And I realized, yes, you do, but look at all these things. You got to focus on these, not on that. Focus on these, because this has to be done. It's not a should I or anymore. It has to be done. I knew it had to be done, and I knew it was very scary, but other women have done it, and I knew I could do it too.
Yeah.
So, and my husband and I, we've been married, it'll be 26 years November, and he's my soulmate.
Wow.
And he has never even called me a name. He's so good to me. It's just crazy how good to me he is.
Wow. I see y'all's pictures sometimes, some of your adventures that you post and things like that. And I'm so glad that you're happy now.
Yeah. I mean, we were married 1 year and we adopted a sibling group of 5. A year later, we were married 1 year and we adopted a sibling group of 5. And then the next
Sibling
year,
group. Wow.
a sibling group of 4 the year after. So we had 9 kids. I'm like, you must trust me because you realize if I divorce you, the child support.
Yeah, that's wild. And thank goodness that you did that, it doesn't always turn up what we think is best, but they're having their processes too and their own experiences. One thing that is so in my face is that although I walk with God the way that I do, my children that my children have to develop their own relationship with him. I can want it for them all day long, but really it's about a relationship and a friendship and intimacy between them and Jesus directly. It, you know,
My husband has
it's
been such a good role model for our sons.
really,
Yeah, they had an alternative. They seen how their dad and their uncles were, and they seen how my husband was when he come into the picture. It was all about family. It was all about doing everything was wrapped around the kids, doing stuff for kids. And that's what my sons are all about. They're all about their kids. Everything's about their kids.
that's awesome.
And
I
they can
love
have a
it.
drink or two, and that's it. They're not alcoholics. They're so good to their women. They're so happy in their lives. They're so successful. Just so proud of them. And
Yay.
they adore my husband.
Thank you,
So,
Jesus.
yeah, they think the world of him. They tell him, what a great grandfather he is, and they say, Mom, we don't have to worry about you because we know you have Jim. They know he'll take care of you. They trust him. So that's awesome. And those things don't come overnight. Like
Mm-mm.
how you say you met this guy and it's all fireworks and everything. That's what it was for my first husband. I mean, literally, the first time we kissed, I saw fireworks. It was like you're probably too young to know Love Boat. But Love Boat was this show it was on, and they had these fireworks. Like love was just like, and I saw the fireworks like the Love Boat show the first time he kissed me, and it was all that. And I think we need to make those lists of what we want in a partner, and stick to that, and not those hormones.
And what about the fact that what I've come to learn is that when I have those butterflies and stuff, that's also what I've noticed, just in the ministry work that I do. That also happens when there's an intense situation. It's like that adrenaline starts pumping. So was that my body's warning system? Hello. What about just balance and gentleness and it not having to be so intense? Intimacy is not intensity. You know what I'm saying? And what about just allowing like myself to just heal completely? Because I see a lot of times in my own past where I ended a relationship and then got right back into one and right back into another. And I kept, what about that opportunity to just heal and just be and allow the restoration process to occur through Jesus?
And I think maybe women don't, or even men, realize who are they with this partner when they're trying to figure out, is this the right one for me? Who are you? Do you like the person you are with them? Or are you feeling weak and vulnerable and closed mouth, like you can't speak up, you can't be who you are? Or does this person then sings my soul, like they just
Right.
break you open and like free to be who you are and
Right.
happy around them, and laughter and security. I mean, it's just I don't know how we do it, but we should really be teaching teenagers about these things, because they're at the ages when they're starting to pick these partners. And everybody's starting to go off by twos, and
Yeah.
we're not making good choices. We're going with the hormones, or we're going with he's got a fast car. Tracy Chapman, the fast car song. We're picking up these people to take care of, and it might not be the right thing. So I don't know. I don't know if anybody's going to benefit from our ramblings, but I just think there's so much wisdom out of people that's been through a lot of trauma and have come out on the other end. And where do you get this information out to people? Because where they get in the movies today are awful. I mean, there's not even a good moral ending anymore.
Right.
Like the whole thing's about when are they going to finally have sex, or are they finally going to shoot the bad guy, or really that's what everybody's goal is, these same old, or when are they going to get rich or something and come out of their poverty, or it's just like the goals aren't where it's at, what I'm seeing on TV. Because I grew up in a different era where movies had moral endings.
Moral endings. Yeah. They weren't superficial. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Surface level.
Yeah. And my adopted kids, they, the time they were watching movies, I was like, oh, gosh, I would do things differently now. I would have never let them watch those movies. These teen movies that was out, I didn't pay much attention. They're awful. They meet somebody one minute, they're in bed the next, or they're doing something evil to somebody, and that somehow is funny. And I was realizing my adopted girls were getting ideas from the villain in these movies, how to set up somebody, how to mistreat somebody. They weren't picking the side of the victim, the heroine in the movie. They were picking the villain side. They was getting ideas on how to. I was like, gosh, I wouldn't let him watch. Wish I would have let him watch that. But and the sex part too. There's so much sex in teen movies that I wasn't really taken seriously.
Well, what about music? I mean, same thing there,
Yeah.
The music. I could go on a soapbox about that and the power that music has over people and the way it affects our emotions and our thoughts. But I'm not going to do that.
I can remember in the 70s, the sexy songs giving me ideas.
Yeah.
Rod Stewart. Yeah. Hot legs. Oh, wow. That sounds cool. All this stuff, all these sexy songs. And you get thinking that I guess that's what the world's about for teenagers. Yeah. And then, like I say, I heard it in the music, and I'm sure the kids did, but I seen it in their movies. And so, I mean, I suppose a lot of people watch and think, yeah, but not everybody wants to be a narc, a Christian like you. Not everybody wants to be doing the right things and everything turning out right for them. But I tell you, I learned early on that things turn out better for you when you do what's right. And it's like some of the adoptees, like they got to do everything wrong first before they ever try anything right. And then two of them end up addicted to heroin and lost custody of their kids because they turned 18. They went back to their biological, who's on drugs, who says, this is funny, go sleep with that one and that one. This is all funny. And then it wasn't so funny when they end up addicted and lost their kids. And then the other ones, they went through their 20s, and I thought, God, they're never going to straighten up. And they did in their 30s. And they're doing something with their lives now. And it's like, oh, you're going to act like me now, right? You choose this mom as your role model instead of the, bios that was still acting like teenagers at 40.
But that's the mother and the father wound, though, Peggy. Honestly, like, you are an amazing woman, and you parented and you mothered them with 150% love, but there's such a wound of the mother and the father wound, and it affects people so much. I grew up without a father, and it didn't matter that my mother had remarried. It wasn't the same. And I've learned so much. This is gonna sound like I've learned so much about, like, I never thought I would be saying this, but if I had lived my life according to the word, the Bible, how much pain would have been spared for my children. Me too, but my children, I can't undo it. It is part of my story. I'm not ashamed. But I look back on it, I'm like, oh, that's why it says this. Well, look,
There's a quote in the Bible, and I don't go around quoting the Bible. I know you do. You're good at it. I don't have the memory for it, but there's one that something about 1,000 angels rejoice when one sinner repents more than when one righteous something. I don't know what the last word is. I can never remember that. But I just love that. And then the first day I heard it like 3 times that day. I heard it on the radio, and then I was watching Little House on Prairie, and I saw it on episode, and I'm like, okay, I've watched every episode of Little House on Prairie 100 times. I've never seen this one. And they quoted that. And then I heard it again later in the day, and I'm like, I heard that 3 times. I never heard it before. And I love that because, a lot of people think that Christians are, oh, I'm all goody goody and I do no wrong, and therefore God loves me best. I was like, do you not realize how thrilled God is when one that has just done everything wrong decides to start trying right?
Yeah.
That's, I mean, the lost sheep, you know?
It is. A scripture that I actually, let me see if I wrote it down here. I was meditating on, it literally says, oh, I was making notes on whoever has ears to hear, because for so long I couldn't hear anything spiritual. When people would talk about Jesus or the Bible, I just immediately felt attacked because I didn't have ears to hear. But in First John, when it talks about the oneness between Jesus and the Father, that I and my Father are one, that no one can snatch them from my Father's hand, that He's the greatest of all, you know. And to know that we were actually, yeah, I and the Father are one, to know that we were actually considered and thought of before the foundation of the earth was laid, just blows my mind. And you know, part of my experience, I don't know if you remember this part, but when I looked out and I saw all of those people, Peggy, everyone was equal. There was nobody was separated or left out. Like, it was, everybody was equal. And when I said to him, I'm looking at everyone and they were looking at me, I was up on that platform, and I said, what do I do? What do I do? And he said, love them. I said, okay, well, what am I going to say? And he's like, I leaned into his presence. He said, the truth. Like, okay, because this whole experience is kind of, and then I said, well, what am I going to change? And I meant about the story and about me. And he was like, it was nothing, but I understood it to mean nothing. You can't change anything. You are incapable. I'm going to do it for you. And then I said, okay, but where am I going to learn everything? And he said, it's already inside of you. And I knew that his love was for every single person that was standing there. Every single person he loved so intently, so intentionally, you know. And I think that it's that the lack of that knowledge and the way that things have been presented to people that scares them away, that causes them that the church hurt, or the, you know, like me, I didn't have ears to hear, so it was like, yeah. But if they really understood, if those people that were standing there really understood the power of his love and what it could do for them if they let him in, you know.
I remember when I was still not finding myself, still confused, still trying to fit in. And I was praying for the 100th time, you know, like, God, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Because I always thought the problem was me, because everybody else seemed to have all the answers. I was the square peg in the round hole, you know, could never fit in. I said, it's funny because my name being Peg, but, and he was like, what's wrong with me? And I heard, the only thing wrong with you is you don't believe in yourself. And so I have to remind myself of that sometimes. And that's usually the right answer when I'm like, well, everybody says this and everybody says this and that. And then I'm like, but I think this and this, and what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And I realize, wait a minute, I'm not believing in myself. And once I do that and realize why I made the decision to do something that I did, that it was the right choice. It was a moral choice. And the other people aren't doing that moral choice. When I was a drug counselor, I'd do groups, and after a while, the people people who were addicted would say, "Well, they didn't want a counselor that hadn't had addiction problem before. They didn't want me as a counselor. That I don't understand what they're going through." And I said, "Well, I think the purpose of having a counselor that was never addicted, it would be that." If you're sitting around, if you were addicted before and you're hearing about this drug abuse all the time, you would start to crave it. And you would start to go along and, you know, go back into those things. And I said, but for me, I says, I think it's good that I was never addicted, because you can see a life lived without addiction. I can tell you what my life is like. And no, it's not easy. It's hard and it's struggle and this and that. But I have achieved this and I've achieved that and achieved all these things I would have never. And what do you know, not to point fingers, but I'm thinking at the time I wanted to say, but I didn't, but I'm thinking, and what are you doing? Because this one over here was just talking about stealing from grandma, getting in grandma's purse and stealing her money for their drugs, you know, and this one over here is doing this and that. And I'm like, you have all these major problems of selfishness to support your habit that I have never had, never will.
And see, I think for me, it was pain avoidance, pleasure seeking behaviors that never processed out of me, I guess. I don't know. Like there was trauma, and then it was like to feel pleasure, to feel those chemicals release, but ultimately it became such a bondage for me. You know, there was no freedom in it. It became a prison where then it was like I obsessed and I was compulsively using. It wasn't about having a good time anymore. Everybody's story is a little bit different. I can't speak for everybody, but for
No,
me,
I heard that a
it was,
lot, actually. I heard that a lot. It wasn't about getting high anymore. It's not being sick.
yeah.
Yeah. Every day was just about not being sick. It wasn't about getting high anymore.
Oh, I'm so glad to be free. I'm so grateful.
Yeah. And I wish there was better help for people than what these methadone clinics are offering.
Mm.
And I wish there was better help for people than what counseling is offered in prisons. Because as a counselor in prison, I thought I was going to help these ladies. You're not doing your counseling. I mean, we have bachelor's degrees. What kind of counseling are we going to do? You know, what can we do now? You're in there for 20 years. You know, what are we going to, they're just in.
Yeah, but doesn't it become like helping them through conflict resolution with the ladies that they're in there with and stuff like that? No.
They're just into play the games that are being played by inmates. They're learning how to play them, get what they want from the officers and their relationships with other women. And they're losing contact with their families and their children, and they're just in there playing the games, getting by each day. And then time for parole hearings is a mess because the manipulation, they all come to counseling then. Because they all want me to give them a good, stand up for them at a parole hearing. And so they want me to listen to this, and they're promising that. And then they self-sabotage all the time. Right before parole hearing, they'll break the dumbest little rule and get right up, and it'll keep them from getting their parole. And they'll say they got scared. They didn't want to get out, or they got a girlfriend inside, didn't want to leave, and it's I didn't see anybody that I felt was like, hey, help me resolve my childhood issues. Or
Really?
no. No, they're not going to be honest with a counselor. They're not going to open up. Yeah, it's about looking tough, being tough.
Wow.
Yeah, and you're just processing them. Yeah. It was. I found it. I found the drug treatment, and I found the women's prisons to be a waste of time. As far as thinking you're going to help anybody, anything you do or say. I mean, unless they have their needs, and they want their needs met, and that's about it. So, I don't know. But so you're doing some important work. Like I'm retired, but you're doing important work with child sex trafficking, or just the trafficking of women in general, or just human trafficking?
Trafficking of women. The women I work with are adults. Yeah, and they've been trafficked and exploited, and it's a prevalent, like I said, here in Texas. And yeah, these women want.
Do you feel you're helping?
Oh yeah, definitely. It is. Sometimes I'm just in awe of what I get to do every day, and had my experience not happened, I wouldn't. I don't know that I would be doing it. Putting aside all selfish ambition and all personal material gain and all putting aside self and walking into this role, getting to be present in these women's lives on a daily basis is a great joy and a great blessing, and a great learning opportunity too.
Are you helping them get set up with independence?
So I work for a ministry that helps them do all of that. Yes.
Okay.
That is the end goal. So reach, rescue, and restore. Right. So reach the women, whether they're coming to us from hospitals, coming to us from, other organizations that women can reach out to when they've been trafficked, and then bringing them into the home, kind of like a first responder, and meeting with them, and just having the initial conversations, and then so that's rescuing, and then restoring them. The program allows them to live in the home for an extended period of time, with a restoration goal in mind. So it could be a year, it could be 18 months, it could be longer, depending on each woman. It's not a cookie cutter situation. It's not. And I think that that's what a lot of systems are, is a cookie cutter system, but it doesn't work that way. People aren't cookies. So bringing them in, and they receive medical care, dental care, clothing, food, safe shelter, a place to sleep every night where no one's going to hurt them, get counseling. We do a lot of different types of counseling. It's not always that one-on-one counseling that the woman needs. It can be other types of counseling services, and then classes on things like parenting and budgeting, and computers, and Old Testament classes, New Testament classes, really training them up in the way in which they should go. And I get to be there in the evenings and spend time with them and hear about their day and what they're learning. And that's why I was asking about the conflict resolution, because there's an element of that, of course, with multiple women in a house.
Yeah,
And
we had 10 girls. So yeah, that's
yeah,
fun.
yeah. So, and then with the ultimate goal being that they would graduate the program with a great position, whatever career choice they feel that God's led them to do, and where they won't be financially dependent on anyone else, or in financial fear that would cause them to ever revert back. And then, there's even an apartment building that the ministry owns where the ladies live, is like a springboard for them to save to potentially buy a home, and teaching them how to live without a comfortable life, without a great deal of debt. And then, so
Is there a lot
some
of
of our
addiction?
women have gone in, not as much as you'd think.
Good. That's good to hear.
Yeah. A lot of people or women, like they'll be given drugs to do what they do, and then there can be that dependency, but a lot of them were using to numb the reality of what they were living. But life doesn't stop for them while they're being trafficked. I mean, their family still, loved ones still die. Things still happen outside of that realm. And so in every case, the woman was very isolated. The woman was very isolated, not allowed to contact family. So it's a whole process that they experience when they are finally free.
Is trafficked the same as prostitution? Like, we say trafficked, but are these women what we would have called prostitutes before? Like, or are these like people that's kidnapped against their will and forced to do prostitution? Is that what trafficked is?
It's both. It's both, because and we also help women who've been exploited. So if you're homeless and you don't have anywhere to sleep, and you know that by offering your body you'll at least get somewhere to sleep for that night, you're exploited. That person both that agreed to do that for you is exploiting you, and then we can exploit ourselves as well, unintentionally, out of desperation. But yeah, some of the women were taken against their will, kidnapped, held in undisclosed places, and beaten to the point where they're afraid to even try to escape. Yeah, it's so intense, and every case is different.
I don't know if I have words to say what I want to say, but I don't know how to really say it. But like, okay, so I got out of college, and I started making $6.68 an hour back in 1992 at Children's Services. And my son's friends, just a couple years after that, were graduating high school, making 3 times that at these factories.
Mm-hmm.
And women, now I know there's exceptions, and I shouldn't just glump them all. And maybe it's not that way anymore, but it seems like, what do? We graduate high school and you start waitressing, working in a nursing home, working as a secretary, all these things. And men go to these factories and make so much more. And they don't hire very many women. We're not strong enough. We don't care about the tools. We don't understand the tools. We don't understand how to, the men have the compensate, or, we think that men may not even have the, prior knowledge how to do these tools, but just because they're a man, they get hired. And, after social work, I went to work with my husband on the pipeline, but it took me a long time to get hired. They would rather hire a boy right out of high school than hire me, who was accepted to law school, who had, a bachelor's degree from a university, had all this professional, I was in charge of a prison. I was in charge of this. I had all this. They didn't want me. I wasn't able to do security at a plant, but a young boy, 18, right out of high school, he could. Like, why is that? I have a degree in criminal justice. So, I worked in a master's degree prison. Why can't I do security?
But see, that gets back into the programming I was talking about earlier, how we're programmed to be believe certain things. So it sounds like people just working off their programs, the way that they've always done things, what they've seen done generations before, and what everybody else is doing. It's,
Yeah. And I see my granddaughters going into that now, and it's like, gosh, get into welding, get into something that pays. And if you're not going to college right now, there's so many things, and they're like, ew, welding, and ew.
Welding is hard work. My son-in-law is a welder. It's hard.
Yeah, but there's other things that they could do other than just these traditional waitress, McDonald's or whatever, these traditional low-paying jobs, because the women are the ones that are going to get pregnant. They're the ones that are likely to be single parent, and we're going to be raising these kids. We're going to have to pay. How do you pay for daycare on a minimum wage? And these guys, they just, step out of college, go to this plant, they get hired on, they're making good money, they got this good, all these benefits, and they're not tied down with paying daycare. It just, I don't know. Seems so. And then because it comes down to the prostitution, to where these women are out here and that's how they can make money. It's just like they can't go on and get a good paying job, or if they quit school because of abuse, then they can't, get their high school diploma or whatever.
It depends on, like I said, each case is different. Like some women have went to trade schools or start ministry school or college, everyone's different.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that is very important to us.
I just grew up in an era where, like when I was little, I remember my aunt saying, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, what's my choices?" I didn't know I could do anything. Everybody I knew, all the mothers just was mothers, but they didn't work. So I don't know she said, "Well, you could be a nurse or a teacher or a secretary." I was like, "That's my 3 choices." Yeah. Like, I don't like any of those choices. So
yeah, there's some limiting belief there. I mean, because that's definitely not all the choices. When I graduated high school, like I said, I went to work in a law office, and I was very determined. I climbed the corporate ladder, but reached a certain level of success, but found myself still totally vacant of joy and peace. I sold technology, so it depends on what the person's aptitude is. I've sold a lot of different things, but mostly the technical sector, because that's how my mind works sometimes. So,
you mentioned several times that, you weren't a victim. You weren't exposed to the perpetrators stuff, but I think when you make your own money, and it sounds like you were smart, and when you make your own money and you're smart, it just seems like you're not in those situations like some others that I was just kind of dumb. I was just gullible and didn't have a lot of self-esteem. And I knew those girls, I would call them BOE, business something. I don't know what it was when I was in school and they learned typing and learned to be a secretary and stuff. I stayed clear away from those classes. I was like,
I learned typing in high school too. I learned typing in school, and that helped at the law office, you know.
You're smart to do that. I realized later, I wish I had done that. I wish I was in every home ec class that they offered. I just wanted to be a mom. I graduated knowing how to sew. I was like, I won awards for my sewing. I was in Future Homemakers of America. I knew how to cook. I was really good at cooking. And I knew all these mommy things. But typing, no. So when I started college 10 years later, I was really at a disadvantage. I had no idea how to type. I had no idea how to turn on a computer. In 1989, I took my youngest son with me to college one day to show me how. He was like 8. So I did. I took him to college with me to show, because I was too embarrassed to know how dumb I was. So I took my son. I was like, show me how to turn this on. What do I do? And he was just one of those that just naturally just knew these things. So, because I don't think they had him in the school much, but he could figure stuff out.
That's good. Wow.
So you sound like you I don't want to say thinking like a man, but like you had more your head on straight than what some girls may. I mean, because you were working.
Yeah, I grew up not having things that I wanted, you know, and I was determined that, you know, and that mindset did serve me well for that period of life, you know, working very hard, never missing work. Yeah, it served me. And
then almost died from drugs.
And then when I came back, not having that same level of commitment at all to corporate America, it changed the way I viewed corporate America altogether. And honestly, that's probably too much to get into on this particular podcast. I think my battery's running low.
Okay.
But it just changed everything, Peggy. It changed all of that for me.
Okay.
Now I wish I would have done home ec. I wish I would have learned to sew. I wish I would have learned. You know, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. Well, your battery's run low. My gosh, girl, we're gonna hear a long time. So I'll get this sent to you. I don't know what people will think of it, but here it is, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on today. It was good to talk to you and get to know you more.
You too. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.